There was a case that forced me to rethink everything I believed about privilege, about parenting, responsibility, and what happens when someone grows up convinced they're too important, too wealthy, or too connected to ever face real consequences. It happened on a Thursday morning, gray and heavy, the kind where even the courtroom lights felt colder than usual. Before we go any further, subscribe to Case Closed if you believe accountability should apply to everyone. And if you respect Judge Caprio's approach to justice, comment Judge Caprio below. I'd love to see it. Now, let me tell you what happened next.
The gallery was filling up with the usual crowd, working people who took time off from their jobs to deal with their citations, young people making their first mistakes, older folks who should have known better. The hum of conversation, the shuffling of papers, the nervous energy that always fills a courtroom before proceedings begin. And then she walked in. I'm going to call her Sarah Mitchell. That's not her real name, of course, but it will serve our purposes here. Sarah Mitchell was 23 years old, blonde hair styled perfectly, designer clothes that probably cost more than most people in that courtroom made in a month. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having heard the word no in any meaningful way. Behind her walked her mother, Victoria Mitchell, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and status. And behind both of them, a lawyer in an expensive three-piece suit carrying a leather briefcase that I'm sure cost more than my first car. I could feel the atmosphere in the courtroom shift the moment they entered. Other defendants in the gallery noticed. They always notice. There's an instinct that people have, a way of recognizing when someone believes they exist in a different universe than the rest of us. Sarah didn't walk to the defense table. She glided. She didn't look at me with the nervousness or respect that most people show when they stand before a judge. She looked at me like I was an inconvenience, a minor obstacle between her and her afternoon spa appointment. I looked down at the file in front of me, and I felt my jaw tighten. Sarah Mitchell was charged with reckless driving, driving under the influence, and leaving the scene of an accident. Let me be very clear about what those words actually mean, because in the sterile language of legal charges, we sometimes lose sight of the human reality beneath them. On the night of September 15th, Sarah Mitchell got behind the wheel of her BMW after consuming alcohol at a party in the affluent neighborhood where her parents lived. She was driving well over the speed limit through a residential area, a neighborhood where children play, where elderly couples take evening walks, where families feel safe because they trust that the people driving through their streets will follow the most basic rules of civilized society. Sarah Mitchell did not follow those rules. She ran a stop sign at an intersection and collided with another vehicle, a modest sedan driven by a 67-year-old woman named Margaret Chen. Margaret Chen was on her way home from visiting her daughter and grandchildren. She had lived in this community for 42 years. She was a retired teacher who had spent her entire career educating children in underprivileged schools. She drove a 15-year-old car because she had always been more interested in contributing to her community than in accumulating material possessions. When Sarah Mitchell
BMW slammed into the side of Margaret's sedan. Margaret suffered a broken collarbone, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion that left her unable to drive for months afterward. And what did Sarah Mitchell do after causing this collision? Did she stop? Did she check on the woman whose life she had just upended? Did she call for help? No. She looked at the damage to her own vehicle, made a split-second calculation about the consequences she might face, and she drove away. She left Margaret Chen bleeding and disoriented in her crumpled vehicle, while Sarah sped back to her parents' estate, parked her damaged car in the garage, and apparently went to bed as if nothing had happened. Now let me paint you a picture of what could have been. What if Margaret Chen had been driving with her grandchildren in the back seat? What if those 2 little girls, ages 5 and 7, had been coming home from their grandmother's house when Sarah Mitchell's BMW came barreling through that intersection? What if instead of a broken collarbone and cracked ribs, we were talking about something far worse? What if Margaret had died in that intersection while Sarah Mitchell drove away without a second thought? These are not hypothetical questions designed to be dramatic. These are the realities that we must consider when someone makes the decision to get behind the wheel while impaired. Every single time someone drives drunk, they are playing Russian roulette with other people's lives. They are saying, my convenience, my desire to not call a cab or ask for a ride is more important than your safety, your life, your family's future. I looked at Sarah Mitchell standing at the defense table, and I could see that none of this had truly penetrated her consciousness. She wasn't standing there with remorse. She wasn't standing there with understanding. She was standing there with irritation, with the kind of petulant frustration of someone who believes that rules are for other people, that consequences are things that happen to those less fortunate, less connected, less important than her. Her lawyer stepped forward with a prepared statement. He spoke about Sarah's youth, about her promising future, about how she had already been accepted to a prestigious graduate program. He talked about her volunteer work, although I noticed he didn't mention that most of that volunteer work had been court-ordered following a previous incident that her family had managed to sweep under the rug. He spoke about the trauma she had experienced from the accident, as if she were the victim in this scenario, as if the woman she hit and left bleeding in her vehicle was somehow a minor detail in Sarah's tragic story. And then her mother, Victoria Mitchell, stepped forward. Victoria was a prominent figure in our community. She sat on boards, she attended galas, she made substantial donations to various causes, always with her name prominently displayed on plaques and programs. She began to speak, and what she said made my blood run cold. "Your Honor," she said in a voice that dripped with condescension, "my daughter has been through enough. This incident has been very stressful for our entire family. Sarah has a bright future ahead of her. She's been accepted to business school. She has opportunities that could be jeopardized by an excessive punishment. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement that allows her to move forward with her life. We're prepared to compensate the other driver. Of course, money should not be an object in resolving this matter quickly and quietly." I sat back in my chair. I looked at Victoria Mitchell, and I felt something that I rarely allow myself to feel in the courtroom. I felt anger. Not the explosive, uncontrolled anger that clouds judgment, but the cold, focused anger that comes from witnessing someone fundamentally misunderstand what justice means. "Mrs. Mitchell," I said slowly, "let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You believe that because your family has money, because your daughter has educational opportunities, because this has been stressful for you, that she should face minimal consequences for driving drunk, causing an accident that seriously injured another human being, and then fleeing the scene?" Victoria Mitchell smiled. It was the smile of someone who had used wealth and influence to make problems disappear her entire life. "Your Honor, I'm simply suggesting that we consider all factors. Sarah has already learned her lesson. She's extremely sorry for what happened." I turned my attention to Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, are you sorry for what happened?" She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. Her eyes were flat, disengaged. She was performing the role of a contrite defendant, because that's what her lawyer had coached her to do. But there was no genuine remorse there. No real understanding of the pain she had caused. "Tell me," I continued, "what specifically are you sorry for?" She blinked, clearly not expecting to have to articulate anything. "I'm sorry for the accident," she said in a voice that suggested she was apologizing for spilling a drink at a dinner party. "The accident," I repeated. "Miss Mitchell, this wasn't an accident in the sense that the word implies something unavoidable. This was a direct result of choices you made. You chose to drink. You chose to get behind the wheel. You chose to drive recklessly through a residential neighborhood, and then after you hit Margaret Chen's vehicle, you chose to flee. Those were all deliberate choices. So I'm going to ask you again, what are you sorry for?" The courtroom was silent. I could see the lawyer shifting uncomfortably. Victoria Mitchell's smile had faded. Sarah stared at me with something approaching defiance. "I'm sorry that it happened," she finally said, and the phrasing told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't accepting responsibility. She was expressing regret that circumstances had inconvenienced her. I looked down at the file. Again, I read through Margaret Chen's victim impact statement for what must have been the 10th time. Margaret described the physical pain that still woke her up at night. She described the medical bills that had drained her retirement savings. She described the fear she now felt whenever she got behind the wheel of a car. She described her grandchildren asking why grandmother couldn't pick them up from school anymore, couldn't take them to the park, couldn't do all the things she used to do before Sarah Mitchell decided that traffic laws didn't apply to her. And at the bottom of the statement, Margaret had written something that broke my heart. She wrote, "I don't want vengeance. I just want her to understand that actions have consequences, that other people matter, that she can't just run away when things get difficult." I looked back up at Sarah Mitchell. I looked at her mother. I looked at the expensive lawyer, and I made a decision. "Mitchell," I began, "your mother suggested that money should not be an object in resolving this matter. She's right about that, but not in the way she thinks. Money cannot purchase your way out of accountability. Money cannot erase the fact that you endangered lives. Money cannot heal Margaret Chen's injuries or restore the months of her life that you stole when you made your choices." I could see Victoria Mitchell's face beginning to change. The confidence was wavering. "Your lawyer has spoken eloquently about your bright future," I continued. "But what about Margaret Chen's future? What about the future of every person who drives through that neighborhood and trusts that other drivers will follow the law? What about the future of the next person who might cross your path if you don't learn this lesson now?" Sarah's lawyer tried to interject. "Your Honor, with all due respect—" "Counselor," I cut him off, my voice sharp, "I have listened to your arguments. I have considered the facts, and I have come to a conclusion about what justice requires in this case. Miss Mitchell, please stand." Sarah stood, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine emotion cross her face. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. "Sarah Mitchell, I am sentencing you to 90 days in county jail. This sentence is not suspended. You will serve this time beginning immediately. Additionally, you will pay full restitution to Margaret Chen for all medical expenses, lost wages, and property damage. You will complete 300 hours of community service, specifically working with victims of drunk driving accidents. Your driver's license is suspended for 3 years, and when you are eventually eligible to drive again, you will be required to install an ignition interlock device in any vehicle you operate for an additional 2 years. The courtroom erupted. Victoria Mitchell gasped. The lawyer immediately began protesting. But Sarah just stared at me with her mouth open, as if I had just spoken a foreign language. "Your Honor!" Victoria Mitchell's voice was shaking now, all pretense of composure gone. "This is absurd. 90 days in jail? That will ruin her graduate school acceptance. That will destroy her future. You can't do this to her." I turned to Victoria Mitchell, and I spoke with a clarity and force that I wanted to make sure penetrated not just her ears, but her soul. "Mrs. Mitchell, I can do this, and I am doing this because your daughter needs to understand something that you have apparently failed to teach her. Actions have consequences. Privilege does not exempt you from the law. And when you endanger other people's lives and then run away like a coward, you forfeit the right to talk about your bright future until you have demonstrated that you understand basic human decency." Victoria was shaking her head, tears beginning to stream down her face. But they weren't tears of remorse for what her daughter had done. They were tears of fury and disbelief that someone had finally said no to her. And then something happened that I will never forget, something that restored a small measure of my faith in humanity. Victoria Mitchell, through her tears, looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and I saw something shift in her expression. The anger began to fade. The denial began to crack. And what emerged underneath was something I hadn't expected. Clarity. "Your Honor," Victoria said quietly, "I need to say something." The courtroom fell silent again. "I have spent my daughter's entire life making her problems disappear," Victoria continued, her voice breaking. "When she got in trouble in high school, I made calls. When she wrecked her first car, I bought her a new one without consequences. When she was arrested for underage drinking, I hired lawyers to make it go away. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself I was giving her opportunities. But what I was really doing was teaching her that she doesn't have to face the results of her choices. Sarah turned to look at her mother, confusion written all over her face. Victoria wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Your Honor, I'm not here to ask you to reduce her sentence. I'm here to ask you to keep it exactly as you've stated it. My daughter needs to learn this lesson, and God help me, I should have taught it to her years ago. The silence in the courtroom was profound. I have presided over thousands of cases, and I had never witnessed a mother stand up and advocate for her child to face full accountability. Sarah's lawyer looked like he had been struck by lightning. Sarah herself seemed to be in shock, looking back and forth between her mother and me as if trying to understand how her world had just turned upside down. Mrs. Mitchell, I said gently, that took tremendous courage, and it tells me that while your daughter may have failed to learn certain lessons, you have not failed to recognize that truth. I turned back to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, your mother has just given you an extraordinary gift. She has given you the opportunity to become someone better than who you are right now. 90 days in jail may seem like the end of the world to you. It may seem unfair. It may seem harsh. But let me tell you what it really is. It's a chance to sit with your choices, a chance to reflect on the pain you caused, a chance to understand that Margaret Chen matters, that her life has value, that the people in that neighborhood deserve to feel safe, that the law applies to everyone, including you. I could see tears beginning to form in Sarah's eyes now. Real tears. Not the practiced tears of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the tears of someone whose worldview has just been shattered. When you complete your sentence, I continued, you will still be young. You will still have opportunities. You may still be able to pursue that graduate degree, though it will be delayed. But you will pursue it as someone who has learned that success without character is meaningless, that privilege without responsibility is poison, that the measure of a person is not what they do when everyone is watching and cheering them on, but what they do when they think no one will ever find out. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the courtroom. Bailiff, please take Ms. Mitchell into custody. As the bailiff approached, Sarah looked at her mother one last time. Victoria Mitchell stepped forward, and for just a moment, she hugged her daughter. I could hear her whisper, I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. I love you. Now go learn how to be the person you were meant to be. The bailiff led Sarah Mitchell out of the courtroom. Her lawyer gathered his papers in stunned silence. Victoria Mitchell remained standing at the defense table, watching her daughter disappear through the door that led to the holding cells. After a long moment, she turned to me. Your Honor, thank you. I nodded. Mrs. Mitchell, parenting is the hardest job in the world, and sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let our children face the consequences of their choices. You did the right thing today. She wiped her eyes one more time and left the courtroom. I sat there for a moment before calling the next case. I thought about Margaret Chen at home, still recovering from injuries that never should have happened. I thought about all the times I've seen privilege shield people from accountability. I thought about how many Sarah Mitchells are out there driving through our neighborhoods, believing that rules don't apply to them because they've never had to face real consequences. But I also thought about Victoria Mitchell standing in that courtroom and choosing truth over comfort. Choosing her daughter's character over her daughter's convenience. That took courage, real courage. You see, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. It's about teaching. It's about drawing lines in the sand and saying no further. But it's also about believing in the possibility of redemption. Sarah Mitchell will serve her 90 days. She will pay her restitution. She will complete her community service. And if she allows those experiences to truly change her, if she emerges from this crucible as someone who understands that other people matter, that actions have consequences, that privilege is a responsibility and not a shield, then this sentence will have served its highest purpose. I don't know what happened to Sarah Mitchell after she left my courtroom that day. I don't know if she truly learned her lesson or if she harbors resentment and bitterness about the consequences she faced. But I know this: Margaret Chen received restitution for her injuries. The community was reminded of something essential, that the law does not bend for wealth, influence, or status. It applies to everyone. And one mother found the strength to choose her child's character over her child's comfort, a choice that takes real courage. That's what justice looks like. Not flawless, not always easy, but honest, human, and rooted in the simple truth that every choice carries responsibility. Thank you for staying with the story. Before you go, subscribe to Case Closed, where accountability still matters and real justice is about people, not power.